toxic masculinity.
All right, so our lovely co-host Valeria is once again stuck at work, so she will not be joining us this evening, which is, I know everybody's just going to drop off suddenly the chat. Like, no, Valeria, why even watch the show? Let me see here. Okay, guys, we actually have some breaking news. This was just covered on Tucker Carlson's show, which I actually watch after my show. I record it and I watch it after my show because I have to set up for my show at the very time that Tucker's doing his show. So I usually miss that stuff. But a friend of mine on Twitter, Brittany, wrote me about this. I knew about the story that was breaking earlier today, but it's about Matt Gaetz. I don't know if you guys have heard about this. It's really just breaking now. But it's a pretty crazy story. It's a really big story. So the New York Times is reporting that Matt Gaetz is a child trafficker and a pedophile and all these nasty things, right? But they're lying. Okay, so this story leaked through the New York Times, and what Matt Gaetz is saying is that this is actually an attempt to blackmail him. This is an extortion scheme to try to take money from him from a former DOJ official. We're going to look at all this because this is a huge story. Let's first look at the original New York Times article. Let's see here. Yeah, there we go. All right, Matt Gaetz is said to face Justice Department inquiry over sex with an underage girl. An inquiry into the Florida congressman was opened in the final months of the Trump administration. People briefed on it said. Now, this is already suspicious from the very beginning for two reasons, in my opinion. The first reason is because Matt Gaetz is one of the most effective Republicans fighting against the Democrats today, right? He's one of those people that is really able to effectively showcase the hypocrisy of the Democrats, how they break the rules, and he viciously attacks them. He goes after them with no fear, totally courageous, and he doesn't hesitate, and he goes for the jugular. He just goes for the kill. Whenever he sees vulnerability, he strikes. And that's what we need in the Republican Party. We don't need hesitation because the Democrats are ruthless, they're criminals, and they'll do whatever they can for power. And Matt Gaetz is like, no. You cannot be a criminal and be a politician. We have to go after you. You cannot do, things that are immoral and unjustifiable. As a politician, I will go after you. And he's been fantastic. I love Matt Gaetz. He's one of my favorite people in Washington, D.C. I've never met him personally, but this is just obviously from observation. All right, so let's go ahead and read the story, the salacious story here. That again, Matt Gaetz is saying this is extortion. This is an extortion scheme. This is not true. This is what Matt Gaetz is saying, and I totally believe him. Oh, I almost forgot to mention the second reason why this is already very suspicious. The second reason is because we know that Democrats use blackmail tactics, extortion, they take bribes, they commit all these kinds of crimes in office. I did a story on this recently about local politicians who do it. I'm researching into how the left does this in Washington, D.C. I'll have a story about that eventually, I'm sure. It's very difficult because the D.C. Democrats are very good at keeping their crimes and misbehavior are very secret under wraps. So you really have to dig to get to this stuff. But we've seen it. We've seen that people be extorted, them try to manipulate people, and in this particular case, this fits into a theory that I've had for a very long time. And the theory is that Democrats like to use evidence that they have against you or evidence they've manufactured to try to coerce you into doing what they want, right? And so my thought is there's a lot of people in D.C. with a lot of dirt on a lot of other people in D.C., and some of them may have even dirt on each other. I've got incriminating evidence on you. You've got incriminating evidence on me. It's what I call, it's what everyone calls mutually assured destruction, right? Mutually assured destruction. And this is normally used when talking about nuclear weapons, but you can also use it when talking about having incriminating evidence. And so it's my theory that a lot of Democrats have incriminating evidence on other Democrats, and that's kind of how they're able to get people to sort of agree with them. Everybody get on the same, everybody can be on the same page, that kind of stuff. You can get people in line by extorting them. And whenever I hear somebody compromise their values in D.C. and side with Democrats on things who are maybe a Republican or maybe a moderate Democrat that were, who was stepping back and saying, I'm not going to do this. I'm like, okay, that's the machine. That's the Democrat blackmail machine in action. That's what I always suspect when I see something like that. When it comes, or they might threaten you, right? I believe, now I was going to do a story on this, and because I have so much stuff I'm always trying to research and work out, which, by the way, not all my stories make it into videos. But I was going to do a story about Ross Perot. I don't know if you remember this, but Ross Perot, I believe, was being threatened. I think his daughter was threatened. And so he had to drop out of the race back years ago when he was running for president in the 90s. And then he got because he's like a billionaire, right? He was able to get his daughter into hiding, and then he joined back up, and he ran again. He joined back up, and to me that was a very illustrative moment in how some of the people in Washington D.C. work, or how they think that they can manipulate things. There was something just yesterday. What was the thing yesterday? There was also some kind of manipulative thing that happened. I don't remember. But this one, I think that this one will be shown to be false. And the only problem is that I don't think this DOJ guy. He may not be connected to other Democrats, and he also may not. And even if he is, he probably won't give that up, right? So what's going to happen is, he'll be the one prosecuted, nobody else will, even if he is connected to other people. But I do think this is an attempt to take out Matt Gaetz. I don't think there's any validity to this. But let's go ahead and have a look at the accusation here from the New York Times. Representative Matt Gaetz, Republican of Florida and a close ally of former President Donald J. Trump, is being investigated by the Justice Department over whether he had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old and paid for her to travel with him, according to 3 people briefed on the matter. Investigators are examining whether Mr. Gaetz violated federal sex trafficking laws, the people said. A variety of federal statutes make it illegal to introduce somebody under 18 to travel over state lines. Sorry, not to introduce, to induce. To induce someone under 18 to travel over state lines to engage in sex in exchange for money or something of value. The Justice Department regularly prosecutes such cases, and offenders often receive severe sentences. It's not clear how Mr. Gaetz met the girl, believed to be 17 at the time of encounters about 2 years ago. At the time of the encounter? I don't know. About 2 years ago that investigators are scrutinizing. According to 2 of the people, the investigation was opened in the final months of the Trump administration under Attorney General William P. Barr. The 2 people said, they keep saying the 2 people. We have 2 sources, ladies and gentlemen. There's 2 sources, 2 separate sources, so this must be true. That's what they're trying to suggest there. Given Mr. Gaetz' national profile, senior Justice Department officials in Washington, including some appointed by Mr. Trump, were notified of the investigation, people said. The three people... okay, so now there's 3 people. The 3 people said that the examination of Mr. Gaetz, 38, is part of a broader investigation into a political ally of his, a local official in Florida named Joel Greenberg, who was indicted last year on an array of charges, including sex trafficking of a child and financially supporting people in exchanges for sex, at least one of whom was an underage girl. Mr. Greenberg, who has since resigned his post as tax collector in Seminole County, north of Orlando, visited the White House with Mr. Gaetz in 2019, according to a photograph that Mr. Greenberg posted on Twitter. No charges have been brought against Mr. Gaetz, and the extent of his criminal exposure is unclear. Mr. Gaetz said that in an interview that his lawyers have been in touch with the Justice Department and that they were told that he was the subject, not the target of an investigation. So now that's a very key distinction. That's a very key distinction. They said that he was the subject of the investigation, not the target of an investigation. It's a very different thing than is said to face Justice Department inquiry over sex with an underage girl. This is trying to suggest that he's guilty of doing it, and therefore it's being investigated because the suspicion is that he actually did this. You know, the New York Times has become so devalued, right? It's lost all integrity. It's just become a kind of propaganda machine for Democrats. And so obviously people leaked this story specifically to smear Matt Gaetz. If the investigation isn't about whether or not Matt Gaetz did this, but rather about somebody trying to extort Matt Gaetz and, you know, create some kind of false evidence to suggest that he did this, or to target him for an investigation, you know, because they want to manipulate him in some way or another. You know, those are two very different things, and it should be reported that way. But it's not being reported that way. It's, you know, you have to get this far down into the article until, you know, which most people don't. Most people just read like the first couple of paragraphs of every article. There's been a lot of studies on that. So people who write these articles, they know it. So they put all the salacious stuff at the top, and then they walk it back later in the article. That's how they manipulate people. I only know that it has to do with women, Mr. Gaetz said. I have a suspicion that somebody is trying to recategorize my generosity towards ex-girlfriends as something more untoward. Mr. Gaetz called the investigation part of an elaborate scheme involving false sex allegations to extort him and his family for $25 million that began this month. He said he and his father, Don Gaetz, had been cooperating with the FBI and wearing a wire after they were approached by people saying they could make the investigation go away. So they are actually putting all the information in. They're just not putting it in until halfway through the article, at which point most people have already stopped reading. All right, so this kind of just goes on and talks a little bit more about the situation, but let's read from Matt Gaetz's own Twitter page. So Matt Gaetz has just tweeted this. He tweeted this, when did he tweet this? At 4:42 p.m. my time, which would be about 2 hours ago, about an hour ago, a little over an hour ago. He wrote, "Over the past several weeks, my family and I have been victims of an organized criminal extortion involving a former DOJ official seeking $25 million while threatening to smear my name." So he thinks that it's an organized criminal extortion. So he thinks there are other people involved. Now, if there are other people involved, my guess is this has been orchestrated by Democrats. Okay. You know what? I'm just going to go ahead and retweet that. So if you want to see that, you can check my Twitter page or just go to Matt Gaetz's Twitter page. All right, let's see here. "We've been cooperating with federal authorities in this matter." And then he says, "And my father has even been wearing a wire at the FBI's direction to catch these criminals. The planted leak to the FBI tonight was intended to thwart that investigation." Well, he meant to the New York Times. "The planted leak to the New York Times tonight was intended to thwart the investigation." That's what he meant to write. He messed up. "No part of this investigation against me, no part of the allegations against me are true, and the people pushing these lies are targets." So what he's saying is the people pushing the lies, I don't understand what he means, are targets. People pushing the lies are targets. I don't know what that means exactly. Here we go. "Of the ongoing extortion investigation." Well, that's why, because the sentence wasn't over. "The people pushing the lies are targets of the ongoing extortion investigation." So the people lying about him and the underage girl, they're the people that the FBI are actually investigating with regard to what the whole investigation is. Okay. Matt Gaetz says, "I demand the DOJ immediately release the tapes made at their direction. I keep saying discretion when it's direction. I don't know why. Which implicate their former colleague in crimes against me based on false allegations." So apparently there is evidence to indicate, that would exonerate Matt Gaetz in the public forum, in the public sphere, and he wants that done. Of course, some people don't believe him. You've got all these guys. You've got all these like leftists who just hate Matt Gaetz, and they want to believe that he's some kind of horrible, evil pedophile, even though he isn't. Now, one thing I wanted to do, this is a little bit of a cheat. I want to play you guys because Matt Gaetz was just on Tucker Carlson. And so I want to play you guys the interview. It's a little bit of a watch, but I think it's well worth it. You may have seen this already if you've been watching Tucker Carlson, but this is Matt Gaetz talking about the situation in his own words.
Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz is under federal investigation for playing some role in sex trafficking and potentially having a relationship with a 17-year-old girl. There are very few details in major news outlets tonight about this story. We have no background on it all and not even any very informed questions. Instead, we've invited Congressman Gaetz on the show to respond to these stories and give us his view of them. Congressman, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate it. So this is obviously a serious allegation. Tell us what the truth is from your perspective.
It is a horrible allegation, and it is a lie. The New York Times is running a story that I have traveled with a 17-year-old woman, and that is verifiably false. People can look at my travel records and see that that is not the case. What is happening is an extortion of me and my family involving a former Department of Justice official. On March 16th, my father got a text message demanding a meeting wherein a person demanded $25 million in exchange for making horrible sex trafficking allegations against me go away. Our family was so troubled by that, we went to the local FBI. And the FBI and the Department of Justice were so concerned about this attempted extortion of a member of Congress that they asked my dad to wear a wire, which he did with the former Department of Justice official. Tonight, I am demanding that the Department of Justice and the FBI release the audio recordings that were made under their supervision and at their direction, which will prove my innocence and that will show that these allegations aren't true. They're merely intended to try to bleed my family out of money. And this former Department of Justice official tomorrow was supposed to be contacted by my father so that specific instructions could be given regarding the wiring of $4.5 million as a down payment on this bribe. I don't think it's a coincidence that tonight, somehow, the New York Times is leaking this information, smearing me, and ruining the investigation that would likely result in one of the former colleagues of the current DOJ being brought to justice for trying to extort me and my family.
So a couple of obvious questions that come to mind, and again, just to restate, this just happened, don't have any other information beyond what we've already said and you have said. First of all, who is this Department of Justice former employee who's trying to extort the money from you, you say?
His name is David McGee. He was a top official in the leadership in the Northern District of Florida as a prosecutor. He currently works at the Beggs and Lane law firm. As a matter of fact, one of the recordings that was made at the FBI and Department of Justice request occurred at that law firm, and the money that was supposed to be paid today that would have shown even more evidence of David McGee's work in this extortion scheme, that was foiled by the New York Times story, and I believe that's why this horrible information and these terrible allegations have been used this evening.
So you're, and I'll get to the investigation in a sec, but you're saying that David McGee was motivated by greed. He was trying to extort money from your family. That's his motivation, you're saying?
I know that there was a demand for money in exchange for a commitment that he could make this investigation go away along with his co-conspirators. They even claim to have specific connections inside the Biden White House. Now, I don't know if that's true. They were promising that Joe Biden would pardon me. Obviously, I don't need a pardon. I'm not seeking a pardon. I have not done anything improper or wrong. But what I am troubled by is the real motivation for all of this. You know, just tonight, Ted Lieu, a Democrat, is calling on me to be removed from the House Judiciary Committee. And I believe we are in an era of our politics now, Tucker, where people are smeared to try to take them out of the conversation. I'm not the only person on screen right now who's been falsely accused of a terrible sex act. You were accused of something that you did not do, and so you know what this feels like. You know the pain it can bring to your family, and you know how it just puts people on defense when you're accused of something so salacious and awful. But it did not happen. It is not true. And the fact that it is the basis of this attempt to extort my family tells a lot. And if the FBI and Department of Justice will release the tapes that they are in possession of, the American people will see what is really going on.
You just referred to a mentally ill viewer who accused me of a sex crime 20 years ago, and of course it was not true. I'd never met the person. But I do agree with you that being accused falsely is one of the worst things that can happen, and you do see it a lot. Let's go back to the investigation. You say that it was or is underway. There was an investigation. What is the basis of that investigation? What is the allegation? That's really not very clear from these news stories.
Yeah, again, I only know what I've read in the New York Times. I can say that actually you and I went to dinner about 2 years ago. Your wife was there, and I brought a friend of mine. You'll remember her. And she was actually threatened by the FBI, told that if she wouldn't cop to the fact that somehow I was involved in some pay-for-play scheme, that she could face trouble. And so I do believe that there are people at the Department of Justice who are trying to smear me, providing for flights and hotel rooms for people that you're dating who are of legal age is not a crime. And I'm just troubled that the lack of any sort of legitimate investigation into me would then convert into this extortion attempt.
I don't remember the woman you're speaking of or the context at all, honestly. But I would like to know who. So they're saying there is a 17-year-old girl who you had a relationship with. Is that true? And who are they? Who is this girl? What are they talking about? The New York Times.
The person doesn't exist. I have not had a relationship with a 17-year-old. That is totally false. The allegation, as I read it in the New York Times, is that I've traveled with some 17-year-old in some relationship. That is false, and records will bear that out to be false.
How long has this investigation been going on? Do you know?
I don't know.
When were you first informed of it?
Again, I really saw this as a deeply troubling challenge for my family on March 16th, when people were, talking about a minor and that there were pictures of me with child prostitutes. That's obviously false. There will be no such pictures because no such thing happened. But really on March 16th was when this got going from the extortion standpoint.
So what happens next? I mean, you can say there is this investigation, I guess a criminal investigation. I'm not quite sure where the sex trafficking part comes in. I don't, again, for the fifth time, I don't really understand this story very well. But where does it go from here? I mean, you've made an allegation against someone by name on the air and accused him of trying to extort millions of dollars from your family. What happens tomorrow?
Well, what was supposed to happen was the transfer of this money that would have implicated the former colleague of these current DOJ officials. But that's obviously not going to happen tomorrow because the New York Times story was leaked in order to quell that investigative effort. So here's what needs to happen next. The FBI and the Department of Justice must release the tapes that are in their possession that were done at their direction. Those tapes will show that I am innocent and that the whole concept of sex charges against me was really just a way to try to bleed my family out of money and probably smear my name because I am a well-known, outspoken conservative, and I guess that's out of style in a lot of parts of the country right now.
Yeah, so this is a great interview. I'm so glad that Tucker did this, and he asked exactly the right questions, right? So the question that needed to be asked was, did you ever date a 17-year-old girl? And that's perfect. That's a perfect question because that's really where I think people will think, okay, maybe Matt Gaetz did date a 17-year-old girl. Maybe he didn't think he did anything wrong, but maybe he actually did something wrong or whatever. But if he's never actually even dated a 17-year-old girl, then none of this, then none of this is possibly true, right? At least according to the story as they've put it in the New York Times, or that he's ever had anything to do with any of these underage girls. It's the kind of story that you can tell certain people, and if they want to believe it, they just will, right? So it doesn't really matter if it's true. It doesn't really matter if there's any. It doesn't even matter if the guy who's accused him is put in prison for this. It doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter how much exoneration Matt Gaetz goes through. There will be certain people who will always believe this. They will stick to him forever just because of the accusation. This is like what happened with Trump and Russia. There are still many Democrats out there who think that Donald Trump colluded with the Russians to steal the 2016 election. If you ask a lot of Democrats, they'll say that still to this day. If you talk to people about what he was intending the message he was intending to send to the Ukrainian president, there are many Democrats today who will still say that, he was trying to get him to dig up or to manufacture false evidence of wrongdoing by Joe Biden. They'll tell you that they believe it because it was an accusation that was made in the press. It was made by a lot of Democrats in Washington, D.C. They said it many, many, many times. And there's just a lot of people. I've talked to a friend of mine whose mother is like a strong Democrat, and we use her to kind of, as an indication of why Democrats believe a lot of the stuff that they believe. And what we figured out, at least with her, is that she just thinks that the media would not report things that weren't true. She just thinks that there's, these media companies, they're too big, they're too professional, they hire, people with morals and ethics, and that there's just too many people, they wouldn't all be lying. And that's a very powerful argument, actually, because there are a lot of people at CNN. There are a lot of people at the New York Times. There are a lot of people at MSNBC. These major corporations do hire hundreds of people. And it does seem a little bit weird that they all kind of join in on these lies, on these stories that aren't true. And somebody like Project Veritas will go in and they'll have somebody record producers or people talking about how it's not true and how they know it's not true and how they're just doing it for ratings and stuff like that. And that news will get leaked, but the only people that'll hear it are people like us. And so we're the only ones that know the truth, that CNN is lying to you. But the people who like CNN and who watch CNN, they may hear something about that, but they may choose not to watch it, or even if they do watch it, they'll say, that's just one producer. He doesn't know what he's talking about, or something like that. And it's weird, man, how they'll justify this stuff. So Matt Gaetz will forever be believed to have done this by certain people, even though I think that it'll come out that it's totally false. And what's really interesting is that Matt Gaetz claims that this investigation was all going to come to a head when the money was actually passed off. And obviously somebody at the DOJ knew this, or somebody who was involved in this extortion scheme knew this, and they told this guy, don't go through with it. Instead, we need to leak all of this information now. We need to leak these accusations now. So this is obviously a sophisticated scheme to try to defame Matt Gaetz, right? So the idea is you call Matt Gaetz up and you say, look, the DOJ is going to look into you for this particular crime. They're going to probably arrest you. You're going to have your name smeared. You're going to lose your job. We can make this all go away if you give us $25 million. Now, the $25 million, that's not really important to the people that are trying to extort Matt Gaetz. What's important is that Matt Gaetz pays the money, and then the scheme is revealed in the media that Matt Gaetz paid this money to quiet people who were accusing him, or to try to silence the DOJ, or to stop them investigating this thing that happened. And then you say, look, he paid the money, and therefore that's proof that he is guilty of this crime. Now, if he doesn't agree to present the money, well, then you just have to put it out in the press anyway, leak it out into the press anyway. But Matt Gaetz agreed to give the money, but this was all being monitored by the FBI. They knew what he was doing in order to catch the criminals. But just before, the day before he was set to hand off the money so that they could implicate these criminals and arrest them and all this kind of stuff and get them on all these charges, the story was leaked to the New York Times. And the New York Times reported it basically as, taking the word of the blackmailers, even though they did put, sort of buried in the middle, Matt Gaetz's response. Let's see here. Oh, I was hoping it was more Matt Gaetz breaking news, but it's Britney Spears breaking news, so we will not be reading that. Thank you, Fox, for alerting me to the Britney Spears breaking news. Anyway, great interview on Tucker. Normally I wouldn't just put up somebody else's interview, but that was critical. That was a really good interview. And anyway, so I'm hoping that this all comes out okay. But another indication of the typical techniques of the Democrats. There's a famous video. Let's see if I can find this. There's a famous video of Nancy Pelosi talking about how you smear somebody, and she called it a wrap-up smear. I think she called it wrap-up smear. Yeah. Let's go ahead and watch that video, because this is another example of how Democrats will just say things. They'll let's see here. I think this might be it. Yeah. How the Democrats.
I know you probably have some interest in it.
Let's see here. Let me go ahead and play this for you guys if you've never seen it before. This is I love this video because it indicates how Democrats do stuff, and she just doesn't care. She's actually, in saying this, in talking about this, she's actually accusing Republicans of doing it. But the truth is, this is what Democrats do. This is what Democrats do. So let me go ahead and click my audio off, and I'll turn the audio on.
Happened in Georgia this week. The fact is, we're very proud of the race that was run there. The candidate who carried the banner, John Ossoff, had a great campaign. I was interested in some of the statements of the people. I don't have it right here. A big chunk in Monday, because it shows these were races chosen by the president in terms of.
Now, this is the wrong video, but it's from the same. This is from the same press conference, so it's so confusing. Let me play it from C-SPAN. Maybe we can watch it on C-SPAN here. Let's see here.
A negative ad.
Is it worth it to try and, I guess, like, rehab your image in some of these Republican districts, or to sort of present what you've done, or are you guys more focused on just the
What people say to me all the time, you raise more money than anybody. Maybe not the Obamas and the Clintons, but I've not run for president. Why don't you spend some of your money on yourself? Go out there and say what you did, this, and this. But, it's just not, maybe I should, but the fact is, what I want to do is have these members present themselves. Because basically, at the end of the day, that's what people are interested in, that contrast. So they focus on something else. You merchandise it. So they don't want them to see that contrast. So they focus on something else. And it's a diversionary tactic. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You demonize, and then we call it the wrap-up smear. If you want to talk politics, you call it the wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this. So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic.
It's a tactic. It's a tactic. Look how smiley she is the whole time she's talking about that. What a slimy, horrible person. So yeah, so they're actually pretty open sometimes. Every once in a while, they're pretty open about how corrupt they are. You just have to read between the lines. So if she's saying that Republicans are doing this thing, let me give you an incredibly detailed explanation of how this exactly works. And how is she so expert at this? Well, probably because she does it a lot. I mean, this is basically an illustration of exactly how she smeared Trump over and over and over again for 4 years while he was president, and even before when he was running. Anyway, Democrats are criminals. What do I say on this show? Democrats are criminals. If you vote for a Democrat, you're voting for a criminal. All right, let's move on to the next story. What is the next story? That's a great question. Okay, we got the Matt Gaetz one. Oh yeah, Biden. Oh, here we go. Let me just look at my list here. All right, next story. Joe Biden's $4 trillion infrastructure plan has massive tax hikes. All right, so let's look at this. Oh, that's an adorable little bat. Hold on, I think I gotta refresh the page here. All right, Biden to announce up to $4 trillion infrastructure plan with massive tax hikes. All right, so Biden will outline his massive. Oh, hold on. You couldn't see the adorable bat because I don't have the desktop thing on, right? Yeah, there we go. All right, so here's Psaki. You know what? Let's just listen to Psaki for a second. I want to hear what she has to say.
Let me just say that the speech tomorrow is about making an investment in America, not just modernizing our roads, our railways, our bridges, but building an infrastructure of the future. So some of it is certainly infrastructure shovel-ready projects. Some of it is how do we expand broadband access. Some of it is ensuring that we are addressing the needs in people's homes and communities. So there are a range of components that he'll talk about when he proposes his ideas tomorrow, when he lays that out in his speech in Pittsburgh.
And how much more should wealthy Americans expect to pay? Will the top marginal rate go back to 39.6% under this proposal?
Well, I expect that tomorrow, again, the speech is really about his vision for creating jobs, good paying union jobs, and really investing in the industries of the future. But he thinks it's the responsible thing to do, to propose a way to pay for that over time. So, and he also believes that there's more that can be done to make the corporate tax code fair.
Toxic Masculinity. Weekdays, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific.